The air was thick with the smell of smoke and sweat as Winston Churchill stood on the deck of the HMS Prince of Wales, his eyes fixed on the horizon. The sound of gunfire and explosions echoed through the air, and the ship shuddered beneath his feet. It was December 1941, and Churchill was on his way to meet with President Franklin D. Roosevelt in Washington, D.C. to discuss the war effort. But for now, he was in the midst of chaos as the Japanese attacked the British fleet in the waters off Malaysia. The cries of the wounded and the dying filled the air, and Churchill's face was set in a determined grimace. He was a man on a mission, driven by his unwavering dedication to the Allied cause. The wind whipped through his hair as he gazed out at the destruction, his eyes burning with a fierce inner fire. The ship's guns boomed and flashed, casting a golden glow over the carnage. Churchill's voice was calm and steady as he gave orders to the crew, his words carrying above the din of battle. But despite the chaos, he stood tall, a rock of resolve in the face of overwhelming odds. The fate of the war, of the world, hung in the balance, and Churchill was ready to do whatever it took to ensure victory. The sound of the guns, the smell of the smoke, the feel of the wind in his hair, it all combined to create a sense of exhilaration, of purpose. But to understand how we got here, to comprehend the complexity of events that led to this moment, we must go back to the beginning, to the early life of a man who would become one of the most iconic leaders of the 20th century. In the grand estate of Blenheim Palace, Oxfordshire, England, a young Winston Churchill was born on November 30th, 1874, to Lord Randolph Churchill and Jenny Jerome. The sound of crackling fires and the soft murmur of conversation filled the air as the family celebrated the arrival of their new son. The palace, with its opulent furnishings and lavish decor, was a testament to the family's wealth and status. As a child, Winston would often explore the palace's vast gardens, feeling the cool mist of the fountain on his face and the soft grass beneath his feet. Winston's early life was marked by privilege and luxury, but also by a sense of duty and responsibility. His father, Lord Randolph, was a prominent politician, and the young Winston would often listen to his father's speeches, mesmerized by the power of his words. The smell of old books and leather-bound tomes filled the air, as Winston spent hours in the palace's library, devouring the works of great authors and historians. His mother, Jenny, was a beautiful and charming woman, with a quick wit and a sharp tongue, who would often regale her son with stories of her American heritage. As Winston grew older, he began to develop a passion for writing and speaking, encouraged by his parents to express himself and share his thoughts with others. He would spend hours practicing his elocution, standing in front of the mirror, watching himself as he spoke, and listening to the sound of his own voice. The feel of the cool glass against his lips as he practiced his pronunciation, the sound of his own voice echoing off the walls, all contributed to his growing confidence as a speaker. His parents, recognizing his talent, encouraged him to pursue his interests, and soon Winston was writing stories and poems and even delivering speeches to his family and friends. In 1887, Winston began his education at Harrow School, where he excelled in his studies, particularly in history and literature. The sound of laughter and chatter filled the air as Winston made friends with his classmates, and the smell of ink and parchment filled his nostrils as he pored over his books. His teachers, impressed by his intelligence and enthusiasm, encouraged him to pursue his interests, and soon Winston was writing for the school newspaper and delivering speeches to his fellow students. The feel of the rough stone beneath his fingers as he climbed the stairs to his dormitory, the sound of the chapel bells ringing out across the grounds, all contributed to his growing sense of purpose and direction. As Winston grew older, he began to develop a sense of ambition, a desire to make a name for himself in the world. He would often spend hours talking to his father, listening to his stories of politics and power, and learning from his experiences. The smell of cigar smoke and brandy filled the air as Winston sat with his father, listening to his tales of adventure and bravery. His father, recognizing his son's ambition, encouraged him to pursue a career in politics, and soon Winston was making plans to enter the world of public service. In 1895, Winston graduated from the Royal Military College at Sandhurst and joined the British Army, eager to see action and make a name for himself. The sound of drums and bugles filled the air as Winston marched with his fellow soldiers, the feel of the sun on his face and the smell of sweat and leather filling his senses. He was assigned to the 4th Hussars and soon found himself in the midst of the Boer War, fighting against the Dutch settlers in South Africa. The smell of gunpowder and blood filled the air, the sound of gunfire and screams echoing across the landscape as Winston faced his first taste of battle. As the war raged on, Winston found himself in the midst of chaos and confusion, but he remained determined and focused, using his skills as a writer and speaker to report on the war and to advocate for the British cause. The feel of the rough paper beneath his fingers as he wrote his dispatches, the sound of the typewriter clacking away as he worked, all contributed to his growing sense of purpose and direction. His reports, filled with vivid descriptions and passionate language, caught the attention of the public, and soon Winston was becoming a household name. As the sun set over the battlefields of South Africa, Winston would often sit by the campfire, listening to the stories of his fellow soldiers and thinking about his own future. The smell of smoke and ash filled the air, the sound of crickets and rustling leaves providing a soothing background noise as Winston reflected on his experiences and his ambitions. He knew that he had a long and difficult road ahead of him, but he was determined to make a name for himself, to leave his mark on the world. And as he drifted off to sleep, the sound of the wind rustling through the trees, the feel of the cool night air on his face, Winston Churchill knew that he was ready for whatever lay ahead, his heart filled with determination, his mind filled with wonder. As the sun rose over the rolling hills of Oxfordshire, Winston Churchill's ambition continued to grow, fueled by the words of his father, Lord Randolph Churchill. The young Winston would often spend hours talking to his father, listening intently as he spoke of politics and power, of the great leaders who had shaped the world. The sound of Lord Randolph's voice, low and gravelly, would fill the rooms of Blenheim Palace, echoing off the stone walls as he spoke of the importance of public service. Winston's eyes would light up with excitement as he listened, his mind racing with the possibilities of what he could achieve. The smell of old books and leather filled the air as Winston delved deeper into his studies, devouring the works of great historians and politicians. He would spend hours in the library, surrounded by the musty scent of aged paper, as he read of the rise and fall of empires, of the great leaders who had shaped the world. The feel of the cool stone floor beneath his feet would be a comforting presence as he sat, lost in thought, his mind wandering through the pages of history. The sound of the clock ticking in the hallway would be a steady heartbeat, marking the passage of time as Winston's ambitions grew. As he entered Harrow School, Winston's horizons expanded, and he began to make a name for himself as a skilled debater and orator. The sound of his voice, clear and confident, would ring out across the school's debating chamber as he argued passionately on the issues of the day. His fellow students would look on in awe, impressed by his conviction and his ability to think on his feet. The feel of the wooden desk beneath his hands would be a familiar comfort as he stood, speaking with passion and conviction, his words hanging in the air like a challenge. The years passed, and Winston's star continued to rise as he entered the Royal Military College at Sandhurst and then the British Army. The smell of gunpowder and sweat would fill the air as he trained, the sound of rifles firing and the thunder of horses' hooves echoing across the parade ground. Winston would feel the weight of his rifle in his hands, the cool metal a reassuring presence as he marched, his heart pounding with excitement. The taste of dust and sweat would be a familiar flavor as he trained, pushing himself to his limits, testing his endurance and his courage. As he saw action in the Boer War and later in World War I, Winston's experiences would shape him, teaching him the value of courage and perseverance. The sound of gunfire and screams would fill the air, the smell of blood and smoke hanging heavy over the battlefield. Winston would feel the weight of his responsibilities, the burden of command, as he led his men into the fray, his heart heavy with the knowledge of what was at stake. The feel of the earth beneath his feet would be a solid presence, a reminder of the reality of war. As he walked, his eyes scanning the horizon, his mind racing with the possibilities of what could happen. And yet, despite the challenges he faced, Winston's determination never wavered, his ambition burning brighter with each passing day. The sound of his voice, ringing out across the House of Commons, would be a familiar presence as he spoke with passion and conviction, his words hanging in the air like a challenge. His fellow politicians would look on in awe, impressed by his conviction and his ability to think on his feet. The feel of the wooden desk beneath his hands would be a comforting presence as he stood, speaking with passion and conviction, his words shaping the course of history. As the years passed, Winston's power and influence grew, as he became a key figure in British politics, serving as First Lord of the Admiralty and later as Minister of Munitions. The smell of smoke and coal would fill the air as he worked tirelessly, his mind racing with the possibilities of what could be achieved. The sound of papers shuffling and the scratch of pens on paper would be a familiar presence as he worked, his eyes scanning the documents, his mind racing with the implications of what he read. The feel of the leather chair beneath him would be a comforting presence as he sat, lost in thought, his mind wandering through the possibilities of what could be achieved. And then, in 1940, came the moment that would define Winston's career. As he became Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, leading the country through the darkest days of World War II. The sound of air raid sirens would fill the air, the smell of smoke and ash hanging heavy over the city, as Winston stood, resolute and determined, his eyes fixed on the horizon, his heart heavy with the knowledge of what was at stake. The feel of the weight of responsibility would be a crushing presence, as he worked tirelessly, his mind racing with the possibilities of what could be achieved, his voice ringing out across the land, a beacon of hope in the darkness. As the war raged on, Winston's leadership would be a steady presence, a rock of stability in a world gone mad. The sound of his voice, ringing out across the land, would be a familiar comfort as he spoke with passion and conviction, his words shaping the course of history. The smell of smoke and sweat would fill the air as he worked tirelessly, his mind racing with the possibilities of what could be achieved, his heart heavy with the knowledge of what was at stake. And as the years passed, Winston's legacy would grow, as he became a symbol of British determination, a reminder of the power of courage and perseverance in the face of overwhelming odds. The feel of the earth beneath his feet would be a solid presence, a reminder of the reality of war as he walked, his eyes scanning the horizon, his mind racing with the possibilities of what could happen. As the sun set over the rolling hills of Oxfordshire, Winston's story would continue to unfold, a testament to the power of ambition and determination. The sound of the clock ticking in the hallway would be a steady heartbeat, marking the passage of time as Winston's legacy grew, a reminder of the impact one man could have on the course of history. The smell of old books and leather would fill the air as Winston's story would be told and retold, a reminder of the power of courage and perseverance, a beacon of hope in the darkness. And as the darkness fell, Winston's voice would whisper in the silence, a reminder of the importance of never giving up, of always striving for greatness, no matter the cost. The feel of the darkness would be a comforting presence, a reminder of the peace that came with the end of the day, as Winston's story would slowly fade into the night, a reminder of the power of one man's ambition to shape the course of history. As the sun set over the British countryside on May 10, 1940, Winston Churchill stood in the House of Commons, his voice ringing out across the chamber as he accepted the role of Prime Minister. The air was thick with tension, the smell of cigarette smoke and worn leather hanging heavy over the assembled members of Parliament. Outside, the sound of air raid sirens pierced the evening air, a stark reminder of the danger that loomed on the horizon. Churchill's eyes, a deep, piercing brown, seemed to bore into the souls of those before him as he spoke, his words dripping with determination and resolve. The days that followed were a blur of activity, Churchill working tirelessly to rally the British people and prepare the nation for the coming storm. On June 4, 1940, he stood once more in the House of Commons, his voice booming out as he delivered his iconic "We shall fight on the beaches" speech. The room was electric, the atmosphere charged with emotion as Churchill's words painted a vivid picture of the struggle to come. The sound of his voice, low and steady, seemed to weave a spell over the assembly, drawing them in and holding them entranced. As he spoke, the sun beat down on the roof of the Commons, casting a warm glow over the proceedings, and the smell of fresh paper and ink wafted through the air, a reminder of the countless speeches and documents that had been crafted in this very room. But despite the rhetoric, the reality of the situation was grim. The British Expeditionary Force, sent to France to support the Allied effort, was in full retreat, pursued by the relentless advance of the German army. The sound of gunfire and explosions echoed across the Channel, a constant reminder of the danger that threatened to engulf the nation. On June 14, 1940, the Germans entered Paris, the city of light falling to the enemy as the British people watched in horror. The news was met with a sense of stunned disbelief, the streets of London falling silent as the reality of the situation sank in. The smell of smoke and ash hung in the air, a grim reminder of the devastation that had been wrought. As the summer of 1940 drew to a close, Churchill faced a crisis of unprecedented proportions. The British Army, battered and bruised, struggled to regroup and recover from the disastrous campaign in France. The nation was on the brink of collapse, the people worn down by the constant bombardment of bad news and the ever-present threat of invasion. The sound of air raid sirens grew more frequent, the drone of enemy aircraft a constant presence in the skies above Britain. On September 7, 1940, the Blitz began, the German air campaign against British cities marking a new and terrifying phase in the conflict. The nights were filled with the sound of explosions and the smell of smoke. The people huddled in shelters and basements as the bombs rained down. The human cost was staggering, the numbers of dead and wounded mounting with each passing day. In the autumn of 1940, the streets of London were filled with the sound of rubble being cleared, the smell of dust and debris hanging heavy in the air. The people moved with a sense of quiet determination, their faces set against the hardships that they faced. Churchill, too, seemed to embody this spirit, his eyes flashing with resolve as he worked tirelessly to rally the nation. On October 21, 1940, he stood in the House of Commons, his voice ringing out as he spoke of the struggle to come. The room was filled with a sense of quiet purpose. The assembled members of Parliament united in their determination to see the nation through this darkest of hours. As the winter of 1940 drew in, the situation grew increasingly dire. The British people, worn down by the constant bombardment and the ever-present threat of invasion, began to lose hope. The sound of air raid sirens grew more frequent, the nights filled with the smell of smoke and the drone of enemy aircraft. But Churchill, undaunted, continued to rally the nation, his words a beacon of hope in the darkness. On November 5, 1940, he stood in the House of Commons, his voice booming out as he spoke of the struggle to come. The room was filled with a sense of quiet determination. The assembled members of Parliament united in their resolve to see the nation through this, its darkest hour. As the clock struck midnight on December 31, 1940, Churchill stood at the window of 10 Downing Street, looking out over the battered and bruised city. The sound of Big Ben, tolling out the hours, seemed to echo through the stillness, a reminder of the passage of time and the struggles that lay ahead. The city, shrouded in darkness, seemed to stretch out before him like a vast, uncertain sea. But Churchill, his eyes fixed on the horizon, seemed undaunted, his spirit unbroken. The fire, burning low in the grate, cast a warm glow over the room, a reminder of the comfort and security that still existed in this, the most uncertain of times. As the night wore on, the silence deepened. The only sound, the soft crackle of the flames and the distant hum of the city, waiting, watching, and holding its breath. As the autumn of 1940 wore on, the Blitz showed no signs of relenting, its relentless drumbeat echoing through the streets of London. The crump of bombs, the shriek of sirens, the smell of smoke and ash hanging heavy in the air. Winston Churchill, now firmly established as Prime Minister, stood at the forefront of Britain's resistance, his voice ringing out across the nation, a beacon of hope in the darkness. On November 5, 1940, he stood in the House of Commons, his eyes flashing with determination, as he delivered a speech that would become one of the most iconic of the war. "The Navy can lose us the war, but only the Air Force can win it." The words hung in the air, a challenge to the Luftwaffe, a promise to the British people. In the cold, dark winter of 1940, Churchill's resolve was tested as never before. The Germans had launched a new campaign, a war of attrition, designed to wear down the British people, to break their spirit. But Churchill would not be swayed. He walked the streets of London, his footsteps echoing off the buildings, his eyes taking in the devastation, the rubble-strewn streets, the burned-out buildings, the makeshift shelters. And yet, even in the midst of such destruction, there was a sense of defiance, of determination. The British people would not be defeated. They would not be broken. On December 29, 1940, Churchill stood on the rooftop of the BBC, looking out over the city, the fires burning below him, the sound of gunfire and explosions carrying on the wind. He felt a sense of pride, of wonder, at the resilience of the British people. As the months dragged on, the war began to turn. The Germans, overstretched and overextended, were beginning to falter. The British, on the other hand, were gaining strength, gaining confidence. On January 22, 1941, Churchill received a visit from President Franklin D. Roosevelt, the two men sitting in the Prime Minister's office, discussing the future of the war. The smell of cigar smoke hung in the air, the sound of laughter and conversation carrying on into the night. It was a turning point, a moment of shift. The Americans were beginning to wake up to the reality of the war, to the threat posed by the Germans. And Churchill, ever the strategist, was quick to seize the opportunity. He knew that with American support, the tide of the war could be turned, that the British people could be saved. In the spring of 1941, the war began to spread. The Germans launched a new campaign, a war of conquest, designed to capture the Middle East, to secure the oil fields of Iraq and Iran. But Churchill was ready. He had been planning, preparing for this moment. The British Army, reinforced and revitalized, was ready to strike back. On May 27, 1941, the German battleship Bismarck was sunk, a major blow to the German Navy. The news flashed around the world, a beacon of hope in the darkness. And Churchill, his eyes shining with triumph, stood in the House of Commons, his voice ringing out across the nation. The British Navy has once again proved itself to be the greatest in the world. The words hung in the air, a challenge to the Germans, a promise to the British people. As the summer of 1941 wore on, the war began to reach its climax. The Germans, stalled on the Eastern Front, were beginning to falter. The British, on the other hand, were gaining strength, gaining momentum. On June 22, 1941, the Germans launched a new campaign, a war of destruction, designed to capture Moscow, to destroy the Soviet Union. But Churchill was ready. He had been planning, preparing for this moment. The British people, rallied and resolute, were ready to stand against the Nazi menace. And so, on the eve of the German invasion, Churchill stood in the House of Commons, his eyes flashing with determination, as he delivered a speech that would become one of the most famous of the war. "We shall fight on the lands, we shall fight on the seas, we shall fight in the air." The words hung in the air, a challenge to the Germans, a promise to the British people. In the end, it was not the bombs nor the bullets that decided the war. It was the ideas, the ideals that had been forged in the fire of resistance. The idea of freedom, of democracy, of human dignity. And Churchill, the great champion of these ideals, stood at the forefront of the victory. His voice, his words, his spirit had inspired a nation, had rallied a people. As the war finally came to an end, on September 2, 1945, Churchill stood on the balcony of the Ministry of Health, looking out over the crowds, the cheering, the tears. He felt a sense of pride, of wonder at the resilience of the human spirit. The world was at peace, the war was over, and Churchill, the great warrior, had emerged victorious. His legacy, his impact, would be felt for generations to come. And as the sun set over the city, casting a golden glow over the streets, the buildings, the people, Churchill's eyes grew heavy, his breathing slowed, and he drifted off to sleep, surrounded by the silence, the stillness of a world at peace. As the dust settled, the world slowly began to take stock of the devastation. The Blitz had left its mark on London, with buildings reduced to rubble and streets littered with debris. The sound of hammers ringing out against the anvil of reconstruction echoed through the city, a cacophony of noise that seemed to reverberate deep within the soul. The smell of smoke and ash hung heavy in the air, a constant reminder of the destruction that had been wrought. And yet, amidst the ruin, there was a sense of determination, a sense of resolve that seemed to burn brighter with every passing day. In the House of Commons, Winston Churchill stood tall, his voice ringing out across the chamber as he spoke of the need for rebuilding, for renewal. His words were like a warm balm, soothing the wounds of a nation and inspiring his people to look to the future with hope and optimism. The room was filled with the murmur of conversation, the rustle of papers being shuffled, and the creak of leather seats as members shifted in their places. But when Churchill spoke, the room fell silent, mesmerized by the power of his oratory. Outside, the city was a different story. The streets were filled with the sound of footsteps, the murmur of conversation, and the wail of sirens in the distance. The smell of food wafted through the air, a savory mix of roasted meats and freshly baked bread that seemed to tantalize the taste buds. And yet, amidst the hustle and bustle, there was a sense of sadness, a sense of loss that seemed to hang over the city like a pall. The Blitz had taken its toll, leaving deep scars that would take a long time to heal. As the weeks turned into months, the city began to rebuild. The sound of hammers and saws filled the air, a symphony of noise that seemed to echo through the streets. The smell of freshly cut wood and concrete hung heavy, a constant reminder of the construction that was underway. And yet, amidst the chaos, there was a sense of order, a sense of purpose that seemed to drive the city forward. The people of London were a resilient bunch, and they were determined to rebuild their city, to make it stronger and more resilient than ever before. In the midst of this chaos, Churchill remained a steady presence, a rock that seemed to anchor the nation. His voice was like a beacon of hope, shining bright in the darkness. His words were like a warm blanket, wrapping the nation in a sense of comfort and security. And his leadership was like a guiding light, illuminating the path forward and inspiring his people to follow. The sound of his voice was like music, a soothing melody that seemed to calm the nerves and lift the spirits. As the months turned into years, the city began to take shape once more. The ruins of old buildings were replaced by new ones, sleek and modern, with clean lines and sharp angles. The streets were filled with the sound of laughter and conversation, the smell of food and drink wafting through the air. And yet, amidst the joy and the laughter, there was a sense of melancholy, a sense of loss that seemed to hang over the city like a shadow. The Blitz had left its mark, and it would take a long time for the city to fully recover. In the years that followed, Churchill's legacy would be cemented, his place in history secure. He would be remembered as a great leader, a man of vision and courage, who had guided his nation through its darkest hour. His name would become synonymous with bravery and determination, a byword for the indomitable spirit of the British people. And his voice would continue to echo through the ages, a reminder of the power of oratory and the impact that one man could have on the course of history. The sound of his voice would fade into the distance, a gentle whisper that seemed to carry on the wind, a reminder of the man who had led his nation to victory and had inspired a generation to greatness. The world was a different place now, a place of uncertainty and doubt. The war had left its mark, and it would take a long time for the world to fully recover. But amidst the chaos and the destruction, there was a sense of hope, a sense of possibility that seemed to hang in the air. The future was uncertain, but it was also full of promise, a blank canvas waiting to be filled with the brushstrokes of history. And as the world looked to the future, it would remember the man who had led the way, the man who had inspired a nation to greatness, and who had left an indelible mark on the course of history. The darkness was slowly receding, and the light of a new dawn was beginning to creep over the horizon, casting a warm glow over the landscape and illuminating the path forward into a brighter, more uncertain future. The silence was almost palpable, a sense of stillness that seemed to settle over the world, like a soft blanket, wrapping everything in a sense of peace and tranquility. As the years passed, Winston Churchill's legacy began to take shape, like a masterfully crafted sculpture emerging from the marble of history. The world remembered him as a titan of leadership, a colossus who had stood tall against the forces of tyranny and oppression. The sound of his voice, booming and resonant, still echoed in the minds of those who had heard him speak, his words weaving a spell of defiance and determination. The smell of smoke and ashes, lingering in the air, reminded people of the devastation of war and the role Churchill had played in shaping the course of history. In the decades that followed, Churchill's name became synonymous with courage and resolve, his image etched in the collective consciousness like an iconic landmark. The feel of worn leather and old books whispering secrets of the past seemed to conjure up the ghost of Churchill, sitting in his favorite armchair, puffing on his cigar, and pondering the weight of history. His writings, a testament to his boundless energy and creativity, continued to inspire generations of leaders and thinkers, their words flowing like a river, carving a path through the landscape of time. As the world changed and new challenges emerged, Churchill's legacy evolved, adapting to the shifting tides of history. His role in shaping the post-war world, as a founding father of the United Nations and a champion of European unity, became increasingly recognized. The taste of victory, sweet and satisfying, still lingered on the lips of those who had fought alongside him, their hearts filled with a sense of pride and purpose. The sound of construction, hammering and drilling, echoed through the streets of London as the city rebuilt and renewed itself, a testament to the indomitable spirit of its people. And yet, as with all great leaders, Churchill's legacy was not without its controversies and criticisms. Some saw him as a product of his time, a man of privilege and entitlement who had failed to address the injustices of colonialism and imperialism. The feel of rough stone and crumbling mortar seemed to whisper tales of forgotten histories and neglected voices, reminding us that even the greatest leaders are not immune to the complexities and nuances of history. The smell of decay and neglect, wafting through the streets of forgotten cities, served as a reminder that even the most iconic figures can be flawed and imperfect. Despite these criticisms, Churchill's impact on the world remains undeniable. His unwavering commitment to democracy and his unshakable optimism in the face of overwhelming adversity continue to inspire people around the world. The sight of the sun rising over the horizon, casting a golden glow over the landscape, seemed to symbolize the hope and promise that Churchill had embodied, a beacon of light in the darkness. The sound of children laughing and playing in the streets of London reminded us that even in the midst of war and destruction, there is always a sense of joy and wonder, a sense of possibility and promise. As we look back on Churchill's life and legacy, we are reminded of the power of individual agency and the impact that one person can have on the course of history. The feel of old parchment and yellowed paper seemed to whisper secrets of the past, reminding us that even the smallest actions can have far-reaching consequences. The smell of old books and dusty archives served as a reminder that history is a complex and multifaceted tapestry, woven from the threads of countless lives and experiences. In the end, Churchill's legacy is a testament to the human spirit in all its complexity and nuance. It reminds us that even in the darkest of times, there is always hope, always a sense of possibility and promise. The sound of a clock ticking, slowly and steadily, seemed to mark the passage of time, reminding us that history is a continuous narrative, unfolding with each passing moment. The sight of the stars twinkling in the night sky served as a reminder that even in the midst of uncertainty and chaos, there is always a sense of wonder and awe, a sense of connection to something greater than ourselves. As we drift off to sleep, surrounded by the shadows of the past, we are reminded that Churchill's legacy is not just a relic of history, but a living, breathing entity that continues to shape and inspire us to this day. The feel of a soft blanket and a warm bed seem to envelop us in a sense of comfort and security, reminding us that even in the midst of uncertainty, there is always a sense of peace and tranquility. The sound of gentle breathing and the rustle of sheets seem to lull us into a deep and dreamless sleep, as the legacy of Winston Churchill faded into the distance, like a ship disappearing over the horizon, leaving behind a trail of memories and reflections that would continue to inspire and guide us for generations to come. The darkness of the night seemed to whisper a final farewell as the stars twinkled like diamonds in the sky, and the world slowly and quietly slipped into the silence of the night. As the years went by and the world continued to change, Winston Churchill's legacy remained a testament to the power of human ambition and determination. The sound of children's laughter echoing through the streets of London, a stark contrast to the devastation and chaos that once ravaged the city. The smell of freshly cut grass and blooming flowers filled the air, a sweet reminder of the beauty and resilience of life. And as we reflect on Churchill's life, we are reminded that true greatness is not solely defined by achievement, but by the capacity to persevere in the face of adversity. The feel of warm sunlight on skin, a comforting sensation that seems to wash away the worries of the world. Churchill's story tells us that love and power are intertwined, that the pursuit of greatness is often driven by a deep-seated desire to leave a lasting impact on the world. The sound of a pen scratching against paper, a reminder of the countless hours Churchill spent writing, pouring his heart and soul into his words. It shows us that failure is an inevitable part of the journey, but it is in those moments of darkness that we discover our greatest strengths. The taste of bitter coffee, a reminder of the long nights and early mornings that often accompany the pursuit of greatness. And it reminds us that survival is not just about enduring, but about thriving, about finding a way to rise above the challenges that life presents. The feel of a gentle breeze on a summer's day, a soothing sensation that seems to calm the mind and lift the spirit. As we drift off to sleep, surrounded by the silence of the night, we are left to ponder the lessons of Churchill's life. The sound of crickets chirping outside, a lullaby that seems to rock the world into a peaceful slumber. The darkness of the room is filled with the weight of history, the memories of a man who lived a life that was full, yet flawed. The smell of old books and leather, a reminder of the countless hours spent reading and learning. And as we carry his story with us into the depths of our subconscious, we are invited to reflect on our own ambitions, our own loves, and our own struggles. The feel of a soft blanket, a comforting sensation that seems to wrap us in a sense of security and peace. The world outside may be vast and unpredictable, but in the stillness of the night, we are reminded that it is in the darkness that we find the courage to face the light and to carry the story of Winston Churchill into the dawn of a new day. The sound of gentle breathing, a reminder that even in sleep, the heart continues to beat and the story continues to unfold.